You've arrived just in time. This evening, I have for you the story of the brave son of Zeus who dared to challenge the Gorgon Medusa. Make sure your air conditioning is on and grab a fluffy blanket because this tale of quiet valor will carry you into sleep in no time. And if you wake tomorrow feeling a little braver, don't forget to come back and subscribe. Your next dream awaits. Locked away beneath the earth in a chamber of unyielding bronze, the Princess Danae sat in silence, imprisoned by her own father, who feared the whispered words of prophecy. The oracle had spoken. His own daughter's son would bring about his end. Desperate to avoid this fate, he sealed her off from the world. Yet even walls of metal could not keep out the will of the gods. From the heavens descended Zeus, not as a man, but as a golden rain, slipping through the cracks of the chamber, shimmering as it fell upon her. From that divine encounter, Perseus was conceived, a child born of prophecy, divinity, and defiance. When the child's cry echoed through the chamber, Acrisius knew his fears had come to life. Unable to bring himself to murder the boy outright, he placed Danae and her newborn into a wooden chest and cast them into the restless sea, leaving their fate to the mercy of the waves. But the sea, perhaps moved by the touch of divinity in the infant, bore them safely to the island of Seriphos, where they were taken in by a humble fisherman named Dictys, whose heart was as gentle as the tides. There Perseus grew into a youth, his strength and stature betraying his godly heritage. Yet peace never lingers long when the gods are involved. The king of the island, Polydectes, became enraptured with Danae, but to rid himself of her protective son, he devised a cruel test. He commanded Perseus to bring him the head of Medusa, the Gorgon, whose gaze turned men to stone. An impossible quest for a mere mortal, but the gods had not abandoned their child. Hermes gave him winged sandals to soar across the lands. Athena gifted him a polished shield to view his foe indirectly. Hades lent him a helm of invisibility to slip unseen, and a curved sword was placed in his hand, light and sharp enough to pierce the toughest hide. With these divine tools, Perseus sought the Gratiae, the Grey Sisters who shared a single eye between them. Waiting until one passed the eye to another, he snatched it mid-air, holding it hostage until they revealed the secret path to the Gorgons. Following their directions, he reached the place where the monstrous sisters slept, their hair a nest of serpents and their skin like living stone. Creeping forward silently, Perseus approached Medusa, the only mortal among them. He dared not look at her directly, instead guiding his strike through the reflection in the shield. In one swift motion, he severed her head, and from her neck sprang winged Pegasus and the giant Chrysor. Placing her head in a sack, he fled as the other Gorgons screamed and wailed, but the helm of Hades kept him hidden from their wrath. As he flew back toward Greece, he passed over distant Ethiopia, where the sky burned orange and the sea frothed white. There he saw a maiden chained to a rock, her eyes wide with fear, her arms trembling against cold chains. This was Andromeda, offered as a sacrifice to a sea monster to atone for her mother's boast. Without hesitation, Perseus dove into battle, the curved blade flashing in the sunlight as he struck down the beast and freed the princess. Taking her hand, he brought her with him, a companion born not of war but of salvation. When he returned to Seriphos, he found that Polydectes had not relented in his pursuit of Danae. Rage burned in Perseus's chest. From his sack, he withdrew the head of Medusa and turned it upon the king and his followers, transforming them into cold, unmoving statues. With justice served, Perseus left the island behind and journeyed to reclaim the kingdom of his birth. But the prophecy clung to him like a shadow. Acrisius, having heard of his return, fled in terror. Yet fate, once set in motion, cannot be denied. At the funeral games of another king, Perseus hurled a discus into the sky, and as it fell, it struck an old man among the crowd. That man was Acrisius, his grandfather, brought low not by malice, but by the fulfillment of the oracle's warning. Perseus, now king, settled with Andromeda and began a line that would echo through the ages. His children would go on to rule Mycenae, Sparta, Elis, and Messenia, and through his line the mighty Heracles would rise. Artists would later paint him as a youth, with winged boots, a gleaming cap, and the hooked sword that cut down monsters. His deeds lived on, not just in story, but in the blood of kings and the breath of legends. Born of gold and bronze, shaped by storms and trials, Perseus became not just a hero, but the very definition of what it meant to stand between fate and fear, to walk where mortals trembled, and to return not with empty hands but with the head of terror itself. When the king discovered that Danae, his own daughter, had given birth to a child, he was filled with fear and dread, for he remembered the prophecy that her son would one day cause his death. To rid himself of this threat, he placed Danae and her infant into a wooden chest and cast them into the open sea, hoping that the waves would claim their lives. But the will of the gods did not waver, and the chest was carried safely across the water until it reached the island of Seriphos among the Cyclades. There, a fisherman named Dictys came upon the strange vessel. Opening it, he found the woman and child still alive, protected by divine fortune, and he brought them to his brother, who is the king of the island. Though there were tales from other lands that claimed the chest floated further still, to the shores of Italy, where Danae found a new life, some said she married a local king and founded a city. Others that she arrived with twin sons from another union. The common and oldest story remained that she stayed in Seriphos. There, under the gaze of the king, her life took a turn once more. The king desired her and wished to make her his own, but she refused him. Frustrated and eager to have her without the interference of her grown son, he devised a plan to send the youth on an impossible quest. He demanded that Perseus fetch him the head of Medusa, the mortal Gorgon, whose gaze could turn all who looked upon her to stone, saying it would be his wedding gift to another woman. In another version, the king had already taken Danae as his wife and kept her son within the temple of the goddess, hoping to keep him from harm or perhaps from rebellion. When the boy's grandfather heard this, he came to see him, but the king protected the youth, and the boy promised he would not harm his grandfather. However, the old man was caught in Seriphos when a storm trapped him there, and during that time, the king died. Later, during the funeral games held in his honor, Perseus threw a discus, and the wind carried it far, striking the old man and killing him. Thus the prophecy fulfilled itself by accident. But before this moment, long before returning to Greece, Perseus began his great journey. It was Athena who first helped him, showing him an image of the Gorgon's head to prepare him for the task. She also warned him not to fear the two immortal sisters of Medusa, for they could not be slain. Guided by her wisdom, he first sought out the Graii, the old sisters of the Gorgons who shared between them a single eye and a single tooth. Waiting until one passed the eye to another, he snatched both from their hands and refused to return them until they told him how to find the nymphs who guarded the divine items he needed. In some tellings, he even cast the eye and tooth into a lake, forever blinding them, so they could no longer protect their sisters. The nymphs, bound by divine fate, gave him the treasures. They offered him winged sandals that allowed him to fly through the air, a magical bag to carry whatever he might take, and a helm of Hades which granted him invisibility. Hermes placed a curved sickle sword in his hand, and Athena gave him a polished mirror-like shield so that he could view the Gorgon without looking directly at her. Armed with these sacred tools, Perseus flew westward toward the ends of the world, to the edge of the ocean where the Gorgons were said to dwell, near the land of Tartessus. These monstrous beings had heads covered in serpent-like scales, tusks that jutted out like those of boars, hands made of bronze, and golden wings that shimmered in the dark. There, in the shadow of the ocean's roar, he found them asleep. Moving carefully, he kept his gaze fixed on the shield, watching their reflections rather than their forms. Slowly, he crept forward to Medusa, the only mortal among them, and with a precise stroke of the sickle, he severed her head. In that moment, as her body collapsed, a great power was unleashed, but Perseus, protected by the helm and shield, gathered the head into the magical bag and fled before the other Gorgons could wake. Their cries shook the air, but they could not find him, for he had already vanished into the wind, his sandals carrying him far beyond their reach. With the head of Medusa now in his possession, his journey would soon lead him to further trials. But on that day, he had fulfilled the impossible task set before him, not by strength alone, but by cunning, courage, and the favor of the gods who watched over his every step. Perseus, having carefully avoided the deadly gaze of the Gorgon by using the polished shield as a mirror, managed to sever Medusa's head without ever looking at her directly, knowing well that even a single glance could turn him to stone. He quickly placed the head inside the special bag he carried on his back, securing it tightly to prevent its deadly power from escaping. But as he began to make his way from the place where the Gorgons dwelled, the two winged sisters of Medusa awakened and discovered what had happened. They took to the air in a furious chase, their cries shrill and vengeful as they pursued him across the sky. Protected by the helmet of Hades, which rendered him invisible, and carried swiftly by the winged sandals, Perseus evaded their pursuit and fled far from the land of shadows. On his journey home, he passed through Ethiopia, where he encountered a princess named Andromeda, chained to a rock and awaiting a sea monster that had come to claim her. With speed and bravery, he defeated the beast and rescued her, taking her as his wife and fathering a son named Perseus, whom he left in the care of her father Cepheus. From there, his path took him further still, to the land of the Hyperboreans, a mysterious people who welcomed him with kindness and hospitality. His travels also brought him to the great Atlas, who refused him shelter. In response, Perseus revealed the head of Medusa, and the sight turned Atlas into a vast and unmoving mountain, his massive form frozen forever in stone, reaching up to hold the heavens. Continuing on, Perseus encountered Phineus, the brother of Cepheus, who opposed his marriage to Andromeda. Without hesitation, he once again drew forth the Gorgon's head, and Phineus was also turned to stone, his form locked in a moment of shock and fury. Eventually, Perseus returned to Seriphus and found his mother hiding in a temple with Dictys, seeking refuge from the relentless advances of the king, who had never abandoned his pursuit of Danae. The king was feasting with his followers when Perseus arrived, and he brought forth the head once more, transforming the king, his guests, and according to some accounts, even the entire island into lifeless stone. With justice delivered, Perseus gave the throne to Dictys, the kind man who had sheltered his mother and helped raise him. The winged sandals and the helmet were then returned to Hermes, who took them back to the nymphs and Hades, their rightful owners, while the head of Medusa was given to Athena, who placed it upon her shield or breastplate as a symbol of power and terror. From there, Perseus travelled to Argos, accompanied by his mother and wife, as well as builders skilled in their craft, said to be Cyclops, though some accounts only mention their skill. But news of his return reached Acrisius, who still feared the old prophecy and fled to Larissa in the land of the Pelasgians. Perseus, wishing to convince him to come back and perhaps make peace, followed him. In one version, however, it is said that another man named Perseus had taken over Argos after forcing Acrisius out. When Perseus arrived, he confronted Perseus and killed him, but was later killed himself by Perseus' son, Megapenthes, in revenge for his father's death. Another version suggests that Perseus was simply driven away and went to Thebes. Yet the most well-known tradition holds that Teutamidas, the king of Larissa, held games in honor of Acrisius, and Perseus taking part in the athletic contests, threw a discus that was carried by a gust of wind and struck Acrisius on the foot, killing him and fulfilling the prophecy unintentionally. Acrisius was buried outside Larissa, and Perseus, not wishing to rule a land he had cursed with sorrow, gave the kingdom of Argos to Megapenthes, and, in return, received control over the city of Tiryns. Other stories say that he remained in Argos and opposed the introduction of wild Dionysian rituals, standing firm against the frenzy they brought. Perseus is credited with founding the cities of Medea and Mycenae, laying the groundwork for future kingdoms. With Andromeda, he had many children: Alcaeus, Sthenelus, Helios, Mestor, Electryon, Gorgophone, and Artochtha. These names would echo through history, with his descendants shaping the future of many regions. Perseus was honored as a hero in several places. Between Argos and Mycenae, in the island of Seriphos, where he had been raised, and even in Athens, where he shared an altar with Dictys, his name was remembered. His deeds were carved into stone, sung in verse, and passed down through time, a story of a man born from prophecy and shaped by the will of the gods, whose life was filled with monsters, kings, wanderings, and legacies that would ripple through the ages. To Acrisius and Eurydice, daughter of Lacedaemon, was born a daughter named Danae, whose beauty and presence brought both joy and great worry to her father. For when he consulted the oracle regarding his legacy, he was told a dreadful fate, that the son born of his daughter would be the one to bring about his death. Gripped by fear, Acrisius took extreme measures to prevent the prophecy from coming true. He locked Danae in a chamber of bronze built beneath the earth or sealed tightly to the sky, where no man could reach her, hoping to keep her isolated from all. Yet fate cannot be stopped by walls, nor can the will of the gods be denied. Zeus, moved by desire and purpose, came to her not in human form, but as a golden shower that descended through the narrow cracks of her prison. From that divine union, Perseus was conceived. When Acrisius learned of the child's birth, his fear turned to desperate action. Refusing to spill royal blood with his own hands, he placed his daughter and grandson into a wooden chest and cast them out to sea, believing the waves would carry them to their end. But the sea, stirred perhaps by divine will, did not take their lives. The chest floated safely to the island of Seriphos, where a humble fisherman named Dictys discovered them. With kindness, he took them in, and with his wife, Clymene, they raised the child who would one day become a hero. On that island stood a king named Polydectes, whose intentions toward Danae were less noble. Whether she resisted him or not, he desired her, and to remove the grown Perseus from her side, he devised a dangerous plan. He told the youth to retrieve the head of Medusa, the only mortal among the Gorgons, whose gaze turned all living things to stone. Perseus accepted the task and set forth, guided by the gods. He came first to the Graeae, 3 ancient sisters who shared one eye and one tooth. He seized these from them and would not return them until they revealed the way to the nymphs who guarded sacred items. From those nymphs, Perseus received winged sandals to fly, a magical bag to carry what must not be seen, and the helm of Hades that made him invisible. Hermes gave him a sickle-shaped blade, and Athena handed him a polished shield, shining like a mirror. With these, he travelled to the far edge of the world, to the land near the ocean where the Gorgons dwelled. Their hair writhed with serpents, their hands gleamed with bronze, their wings flashed with gold, and their faces struck terror. Only Medusa could die, and she lay sleeping when Perseus arrived. Using the mirror-like shield to see her without meeting her gaze, he raised the sickle and cut off her head. At once, the other Gorgons awoke, shrieking and spreading their wings, chasing after him in fury. But Perseus, wearing the helm of Hades, vanished from sight, soaring through the air with the sandals on his feet, and escaped their wrath. He placed Medusa's head in the bag and began his long return. Along the way, he stopped in many places. In Ethiopia, he found a maiden chained to a rock as a sacrifice to a sea monster. She was Andromeda, and Perseus slew the beast, freed her, and took her as his bride. They had a son named Perseus, whom he left with her father Cepheus. He also came to the land of the Hyperboreans, where he was welcomed with peace and reverence. Further still, he reached the dwelling of Atlas, who refused him shelter. In response, Perseus showed him the head of Medusa, turning Atlas into a great mountain, his body forever holding the weight of the heavens. Another who opposed Perseus was Phineus, a brother of Cepheus, who did not support the marriage. Perseus once more revealed the Gorgon's head, and Phineus turned to stone. Finally, Perseus returned to Seriphus and found his mother and Dictys hiding in a temple, seeking safety from the advances of Polydectes. The king and his men were feasting when Perseus arrived. Without a word, he drew the head of Medusa from the bag and held it high. All who looked upon it turned to stone, and in some tales, even the whole island was petrified. The kingdom was then given to Dictys, the one who had shown kindness when all others turned away. Perseus returned the magical items, sandals and helmet, to Hermes, who delivered them back to the nymphs and to Hades. Athena received the Gorgon's head and placed it on her shield, where its power would forever remain. With his task complete, Perseus went to Argos with his mother and wife, and some say with skilled builders who were giants of old, but the memory of the prophecy still hung over all. Acrisius, hearing his grandson approached, fled to Larissa, hoping to avoid fate. Perseus followed, not in anger, but to speak, and perhaps bring peace. Yet at the games held in honor of a local king, Perseus threw a discus. The wind carried it off course, and it struck Acrisius on the foot, killing him and fulfilling the prophecy as foretold. Acrisius was buried outside the city, and Perseus, filled with sorrow, gave up the kingdom of Argos to Megapenthes, the son of Proetus, in exchange for the city of Terins. Some say he stayed in Argos and stood against wild rites brought by Dionysus. Perseus also founded cities. Medea and Mycenae rose by his will. With Andromeda he had many children: Alcaeus, Thanelus, Helios, Mestor, Electron, Gorgophone, and Autochtha. His line would stretch far, remembered by kings and heroes to come. Perseus was honored as a hero in many places, between Argos and Mycenae, on the island of Seriphus, and in Athens, where he shared an altar with Dictys. And far away, in Egypt at Chemnis, a temple stood with his statue, and the land rejoiced whenever he appeared. Thus, His story remained carved in stone, told in whispers, and sung in the voice of legend. While Acrisius was desperately seeking answers from the gods about how he might have sons to carry on his line, an oracle revealed a prophecy that would shake the foundation of his world. The child born of his daughter would be the cause of his death. Fear took hold of him, and rather than tempt fate, he sought to prevent it altogether. He ordered the construction of a chamber made entirely of bronze, hidden deep beneath the earth, a prison of gleaming metal where no eyes could reach and no man could enter. Into this secret cell he placed his daughter Danae, guarding her closely, believing that in isolation the prophecy could be undone. Some claimed that it was his own brother who secretly visited the girl, leading to whispers of betrayal and the beginning of a bitter divide between the two men. But most agreed on a tale far more divine, that the king of the gods, moved by desire and fate, transformed himself into a stream of radiant gold and descended through the cracks in the bronze ceiling, flowing like liquid light into her very womb. From this miraculous union, Perseus was born, a child marked by both prophecy and divinity. When Acrisius learned that Danae had given birth to a son, he refused to believe that it was the work of Zeus. Instead, filled with rage and disbelief, he saw only disgrace and threat in what had happened. Determined to rid himself of both daughter and grandson, he commanded that they be placed inside a wooden chest, a sealed box with no windows, and cast out into the sea. He hoped the waves would carry them to their doom, that the ocean would do what he himself could not. But the gods had other plans. The sea did not swallow the chest. Instead, the tides carried it gently across the waters until it reached the island of Seriphos. There, a fisherman named Dictys saw something unusual bobbing in the waves. With careful hands and curiosity, he hauled it to shore and broke it open, only to find a young woman and a child within, alive and untouched by the sea. Dictys, moved by compassion, took them in. In some accounts, he brought them directly to the king of the island, who welcomed them, took Danae as his wife, and raised Perseus within the sacred temple of Athena, where the boy would grow surrounded by divine presence and holy silence. In other tellings, the king's interest in Danae was less noble, and his desire for her only grew as Perseus reached manhood, setting the stage for the boy's perilous quest. But in this version, it was the fisherman Dictys who became their protector, drawing them from the sea and giving them shelter in a new land. The story of Danae and the arrival of her sea-tossed chest was powerful enough to inspire many plays, now lost to time, written by great poets who retold the moment when the wooden box emerged from the waves. In one such tale, it was said that satyrs, half-beast companions of rustic gods, were the ones who helped drag the chest ashore, their rough hands pulling the ropes while laughter and song filled the air. Their joy turned to awe when they saw what they had found: a golden-haired woman and a sleeping child, glistening under the sun. Even the gods, long removed from the world of men, took note of what had occurred. In ancient poetry, Zeus himself once claimed that among all the women he had loved, none stirred his heart like Danae. He remembered her gentle beauty, her quiet grace, and the golden moment when he had flowed into her chamber like a beam of light. In the songs of poets, Perseus was called the child of a golden stream, a son born not of flesh alone but of divine brilliance. His story began in darkness, beneath the earth, and from that darkness he was cast into the endless sea. Yet he did not sink. He was lifted by the will of gods, cradled by the waves, and delivered to a shore where kindness still lived. From that shore, his tale would only grow, shaped by prophecy, guided by divine hands, and remembered for all time. His name would be carved into stone and sung in temples. But before all that, before monsters and heroes and deeds, there was a mother, a daughter locked away beneath the earth, a child born in secret, and a wooden chest drifting quietly across the sea, waiting to be found. The calm sea stretched wide and unbroken, its surface flat as polished glass, offering no sign of movement or trouble. From the rocky cliffs above, eyes scanned the shoreline, searching for anything unusual, any glint or ripple that might betray the presence of something beneath. At first, nothing stirred. The waves lapped gently against the rocks, and the air was still. But then, along the crannies of the shore where seaweed clung thick and wet, something caught the light, a shape, a gleam, a bulk washed ashore and tangled in kelp. A voice rang out in confusion and awe, unsure what to make of the vision. Was it a creature from the deep, some monstrous gift from the sea gods, a shark or whale sent by Poseidon himself, or something even stranger, a mystery wrapped in a shell of driftwood and sealed tight like a forgotten secret? There it lay, heavy and waterlogged, covered with sea debris and smelling of salt. It was no creature of flesh and fin, but a chest, solid, rough, bound tightly, and sealed as if to hide something sacred or cursed. Dictys, the fisherman who had come upon it, strained as he pulled against its weight. It did not move easily, and even his net sagged from the burden. Its mass was unnatural, more than wood should weigh, as if it carried the weight of fate itself. He cried out for help, his voice echoing across the shore. Farmers in the fields, herders tending goats, labourers resting from their day's toil, all were called to witness what the sea had delivered. Coastal folk who knew every tide and current turned their eyes to the beach where the strange object rested. They came, some curious, others cautious, their hands rough from work, their eyes narrowing at the unexpected sight, and together they dragged it from the water's edge, the chest scraping against stone and sand pulled by ropes, pushed by shoulders, and steadied by calloused hands as it broke open beneath their effort. Silence fell over the group. Inside lay a woman, pale and soaked but breathing, curled protectively around a child no older than an infant, his eyes wide with confusion, his body swaddled in damp cloth. Seaweed clung to her hair like threads of shadow, and salt crusted her lips. Some stepped back in wonder, others murmured prayers, unsure whether they had found a gift or a warning. The woman's eyes opened slowly, her breath shallow, and she clutched the child tighter to her chest as she realized the faces looking down upon her. Among them was Silenos, an old and wild god of the forest, whose sons, lusty satyrs, lingered near, their eyes gleaming not with kindness but with mischief. Silenos, attempting to speak with grace, stepped forward and proclaimed himself a friend, swearing by the gods that he meant no harm. He begged the woman not to flee, not to turn from him in fear. He called upon the sky and the land to witness his pledge of safety and kindness. He even declared that the child, smiling gently in his arms, seemed to greet him like family. But the woman, still weak and wary, raised her voice in despair. She called upon the gods of her homeland, the rivers of Argos that once ran near her childhood home, and above all, to Zeus himself, the one who had come to her, not as a man, but as golden light, and left her, burdened with a child, and a fate from which there was no escape. She asked if he would now abandon her, if she had suffered all only to fall into the hands of beasts, whether god or satyr, who would torment her further. She considered death, even cried out that perhaps a noose would be kinder than the endless torment. But fear held her back, Still, she prayed. She called upon Zeus again, telling him that while he was the cause, it was she who paid the price. Her heart, heavy with sorrow, begged for aid. All the while, the child looked on, innocent, unaware, his eyes curious and soft. He gazed upon the wrinkled, painted face of Silenos and smiled with the innocence of one who does not yet know danger. The satyrs, drawn to this rare beauty and mystery, circled like moths to a flame. Their laughter was coarse, their movements unsteady, their voices raised in jest and temptation. One reached out with boldness, another whispered crude offers, but still she held firm. Silenos, not blind to the mischief of his sons, cursed the fisherman who stood nearby, Dictys, accusing him of trying to steal this prize from under him. His words dripped with bitterness and jealousy, even as he bent low and called to the child, his voice softer now, trying to coax him closer with laughter and strange noises. The boy, still small, whimpered in confusion, but the mother, weakened as she was, would not let go. Her arms wrapped tighter, her fingers trembling, her gaze darting from man to god to creature, all while the waves behind her whispered secrets only the sea could hear. This was the scene that unfolded that day on the shores of Seriphos, a moment of tension, rescue, and divine consequence, where mortals and immortals looked upon one who would one day rise beyond all expectation. And though the winds would soon scatter these voices, and though many of the words spoken were lost to time, the image remained. A chest from the sea, a mother guarding her child, and the uncertain mercy of those who stood above her. The voice of the old forest god continued to echo across the shore, sweetened with false kindness as he tried to coax the child into his grasp. He stretched out his arms with theatrical warmth, calling the little one to come to him, to find shelter and joy in the company of wild animals and woodland life, among martins and fawns and even young porcupines, promising a life filled with rustic pleasures and games, a life where the boy would grow up learning how to catch animals with his bare hands, no longer needing a spear, and offering them as food for his mother, just as it was done in the household of his supposed new father. It was all dressed in lightness and play, a promise of fun and vitality, as though the grimness of the moment could be swept away by talk of meals and forests and hunting without weapons. But beneath the surface of his words was something darker, a threat disguised as affection. He hinted that the boy would share the bed of his mother and the old god himself, twisting love into something grotesque. And around him, the chorus of satyrs swelled with excitement, their laughter rising in chorus, their movements quick and eager. They sang and urged one another forward, convinced that the time had come to force a union with the weary and broken Danae, who had washed ashore with nothing but her child and her silence. They read into her stillness a willingness that was never there, twisting her helplessness into imagined desire, convincing themselves that she had been longing for them all along, as she drifted alone beneath the sea. And now that she saw their youthful bodies and wild energy, they believed she rejoiced and was ready to embrace their so-called love. They cried out that Aphrodite herself was lighting their way, that even the torches of the goddess of passion were shining upon this mad and one-sided celebration. All this unfolded as Danae remained crouched by the chest that had carried her through storm and salt, clinging to her child, surrounded by laughter that meant danger and promises that masked ruin. Her eyes were fixed upward in silent prayer, her thoughts racing between fear, sorrow, and the cold betrayal of fate. Elsewhere, across time and retelling, other voices had tried to make sense of her story. Some refused to name the god at all, pretending that no divinity had touched her. that Perseus had no father but the sea and her tears. Others embraced the mystery, calling him the eagle-born child of the Golden Father, the one who came down like light and was born amid silence and despair. Herodotus noted how no mortal man had ever been named as the father of Perseus, unlike other heroes who had known stepfathers or caretakers. In the eyes of the historian, this omission only confirmed that something divine must have occurred. He marked the line of kings back to Perseus, claiming that by then the people had come to accept them as Greeks, though he dared not speak beyond that point, because no human father had ever been named. Another poet remembered how Danae had suffered at sea, floating helplessly because of the rage of her father, who had cast her away not because of shame, but because of fear. And as she drifted, the waves that rocked her were not crueler than the fate that had set her adrift. The poet Apollonius echoed that pain, reminding the world that fathers can be cruel to their children, especially when they feel threatened by them. Even Strabo, writing about places, not people, could not avoid her story. He described the island of Seriphos not for its size or beauty, but because it was the place where the chest had washed ashore, the island where Dictys found her, dragging the heavy wooden box from the surf with his net. It was the island where Perseus had been raised, cradled by a fisherman and his wife, far from the cruelty of kings. And even long after, when travellers wandered through Argos and visited its ancient places, they were shown underground chambers and buildings that whispered her name. Among these sites, people still remembered Dictys and his wife Clymene, not as rulers or warriors, but as saviours, for it was they who had taken the child and mother into their home, feeding and sheltering them when the world had turned them away. Their kindness had been preserved in memory, even as kings and gods were forgotten. In this way, Danae's story spread across poetry, tragedy, geography, and memory, carried by writers and singers who could not forget the woman who had been locked away beneath the earth, who had seen the sky only when golden light rained down to meet her, who had clutched her newborn in a chest and floated through the unknown sea, who had landed not on soft ground, but into the clutches of wild and lustful creatures. Yet despite all this, she endured, remembered not just as a mother or a victim, but as a figure whose strength had carried a hero across the threshold of myth. And so the fragments of her life were scattered in lost plays, in passing mentions, in cries of satyrs and the prayers of a woman staring into the sky, hoping that someone somewhere would still hear her. The chamber built by the fearful king was once strong and sealed tight, a prison of bronze meant to shield his line from the prophecy that haunted him. Deep beneath the ground, the polished walls reflected no light, but carried the echo of fate in their cold stillness. That chamber, made not for justice, but out of fear, was where he locked away his only daughter, hoping that no man, mortal or divine, could reach her. But even metal and silence could not keep out what was meant to be. In later times, long after the story of her son had moved across lands and seas, the chamber stood as a reminder of the choices made in fear. Yet power shifts as time moves, and when a man named Perseus rose to rule with force and claim the title of tyrant, he tore it down, stripping the earth of its hidden memory, destroying the bronze walls that once held not only a daughter, but the path to a hero's birth. For from that locked space came Perseus, child of Danae and Zeus, a union that had taken place not through ordinary means, but through a transformation that defied nature. The stories remembered how the king of the gods had not approached the woman with footsteps or words, but with radiance, a shower of gold that slipped through the cracks of her prison and lay with her in silence. From this golden descent came Perseus, and though many would deny it or call it myth, his name and his deeds would rise with time. Ancient chroniclers listed him clearly among the sons of Zeus. He was not a child of shadow, nor a nameless wanderer, but one whose origin, though strange and hidden, was always tied to the power that ruled the skies. Yet not all believed. There were those who refused to see divinity in the tale. Perseus himself, the one who had locked Danae away, denied the truth when it stood before him. He did not accept that Zeus had touched his daughter. He turned his eyes from Perseus and doubted even the claim that Dionysus, the god of wine and madness, was truly born from divine blood. He lifted arms against gods and raised walls to shut out what he could not understand. But such denial only brought sorrow. The hidden strength of truth waits quietly, and when it moves, it breaks more than stone. Perseus would come to mourn the things he refused to see. He rejected his grandson, but fate moved forward all the same, and the prophecy he sought to outrun followed behind each step. Perseus himself spoke of it, not in boast, but in acknowledgement. He knew who he was, the son of Zeus, who came to his mother not with speech or embrace, but as gold flowing into her prison and leaving her with child. The poets remembered too. They wrote of the gleaming downpour, of the moment when Zeus changed form and entered the world of mortals not through thunder or lightning, but through golden drops, silent and pure. The shimmering image returned in their lines again and again. One called him gold-begotten. Another noted how even a later king with golden hands, when he touched the water, left droplets that resembled those that once astonished Danae. Still another, in speaking of the passion of gods, said that Danae's was the fourth tale, engraved in the quiver of Eros himself, a moment when love came as gold. No other like it would come again, for after that night no second visit was made. When the prison was sealed once more, the woman it held was already changed forever. She carried life within her and would soon be cast into the sea for it. Her golden wedding, as some called it, brought her not joy but exile, as the wooden chest that held her and her child was pushed from the land and left to float on the waves. The salt touched her hair and her skin, and the sky gave her no comfort. Yet it was from that chest that Perseus came into the world, not on dry land, but borne by the sea to an island far from home. There a fisherman found them, and with him the boy began to grow. From those early days shaped by rejection, by fear, by imprisonment and drifting, Perseus emerged not broken, but strong. His name passed from mouth to mouth, and his deeds reached across the Aegean and beyond. But always the tale began the same, with a locked bronze chamber, with a stream of gold falling through metal, with a girl hidden below ground, and a god who chose not to walk but to shine. Even when temples were raised in other names, even when kings rose and fell, the people remembered. They told of a mother who was locked away because her father feared what might come, of a child born in silence and raised among nets and waves, and of a hero who carried in his blood the light of the heavens and the sorrow of the earth. The chamber was torn down, its walls destroyed by a ruler who would not preserve the shame of another. But the story of what took place inside, of how light became life and silence became legend, lived on not in bronze or stone but in voices, in lines of poetry, in whispers beside fires and offerings beside altars. It did not fade because stories like that, born of fear, love and fate, find a way to remain. The ruler of Seriphus, the same island where a mother and her child once washed ashore locked in a chest, was a man who longed for what he could not possess. He desired Danae, but her son had grown strong, and his presence cast a long shadow. Unable to force his will while Perseus was near, the king devised another plan. He gathered his companions, calling Perseus to join them, and spoke of his wish to marry a woman named Hippodamia, the daughter of a powerful king, who demanded that all her suitors compete in a deadly chariot race. To honor this proposed union, the king said, he was collecting horses from his friends. Perseus, having none to offer, spoke boldly that he would not refuse the king anything, not even the head of the Gorgon if asked. The king, seizing the moment, demanded exactly that. So Perseus, bound now by his word, prepared for the impossible. He would seek out the Gorgon Medusa, whose gaze could turn flesh to stone, the only one among her monstrous sisters who could die. But he would not go alone. Two gods came to his aid: Hermes, the guide of travelers, and Athena, the protector of heroes. With their help, Perseus first sought out the Graeae, three ancient sisters called the Phorcides, named Enyo, Perfredo, and Dano. These old hags were unlike any others, sharing a single eye and a single tooth between them, which they passed among themselves to see and speak. Perseus waited for the moment when the eye changed hands, and with swift precision he snatched it from them. Blinded and helpless, they pleaded for its return. Perseus promised to give it back only if they told him where to find the nymphs who guarded the treasures of the gods. Cornered by their own weakness, the Graeae gave in and told him the way. Then he returned their eye and tooth, keeping his word, and went on his way. When he reached the nymphs, they welcomed him and gave him what he needed: winged sandals that would lift him from the ground, a special bag known as the cabesis to carry what must not be touched, and the helmet of Hades, which would make him unseen by all eyes. He strapped on the sandals, slung the cabesis across his back, and placed the helmet on his head. With these gifts, he was ready. As he took flight, the wind lifted him high and carried him far until he reached the edge of the great Oceanus, where the land fell away into water and sky. There, in the deep silence beyond the known world, he found the Gorgons. Three sisters lay sleeping on the ground, their bodies monstrous and still. Stheno and Euryale, immortal and fearsome, stirred lightly in their sleep. But Medusa, the mortal one, lay without movement, her breath even and slow. Her head was crowned with living snakes hissing softly in dreams. Perseus approached with care, remembering the goddess's warning. He did not look at her directly, for one glance would end his life. Instead, he used the shield, polished bright like a mirror, to guide his steps. Watching her reflection, he raised the cycle-shaped blade gifted by Hermes, and with one clean motion, he struck. The sound was sharp but brief. From the severed neck of the Gorgon, two beings sprang forth: Pegasus, the winged horse who soared into the air, and Chrysaor the giant, born fully grown. Perseus did not stop to marvel. He quickly placed the head into the cabeces, careful not to let its eyes meet his own, and turned to leave. But the other Gorgons, awakened by the sound, screamed and rose, spreading their golden wings in rage. They searched for the one who had slain their sister, but Perseus, hidden by the helmet, moved unseen. The wind carried him again, high and fast, as the cries of the monsters faded behind him. He had done what none before him had dared. He had stolen from death and lived. The journey was not over, but the task he was sent for had been completed. With the head of Medusa sealed safely in the enchanted bag, he began the long flight back across the sea and sky, bearing with him the weight of what he had taken, not just the head of a monster, but the turning point of his own life. Behind him, The Gorgons mourned. The Oceanus stretched endlessly, and the gods watched silently from above, their gifts having changed the course of mortal fate. And so, from the shores of Seriphos to the edge of the world and back again, the son of Zeus and Danae followed the path set by words spoken in pride, guided by gods, armed by nymphs, and shadowed by prophecy. His was a flight not only through distance but through legend, from the moment he stepped forward without a horse to the instant his blade met the serpent-crowned head, and beyond that, to the part of the story where monsters fall and heroes rise. The heads of the Gorgons were a sight more dreadful than any mortal eye could endure, for they were wrapped in thick coils of living snakes, their skin covered in the hard, cold texture of horn scales, twisted together in a way that shimmered and hissed, even when they were still. Their faces bore not the beauty of humanity, but the terror of ancient curses, and from their mouths jutted great tusks like those of wild boars. Their hands, forged from bronze, were not the soft limbs of mortals but sharp and unyielding, weapons in themselves. From their backs grew wings of gold, wide and gleaming, which lifted their terrible forms through the sky in swift pursuit. All who dared to gaze directly upon them were turned to stone, their bodies frozen forever, their last moments trapped in terror. To face them was death, and to survive them was to never have seen them at all. So when Perseus came to the land where they lay, beyond the edge of Oceanus, where the world slipped into shadow and night, he did not rely on courage alone. With Athena guiding him, he held tightly the bronze shield, polished to a mirror's sheen. He moved slowly, careful to never look directly, but only through reflection, watching their images flicker across the curved surface. He stood over the Gorgons as they slept, their breath deep and slow, unaware of his presence. His heart beat fast, but his hand was steady. When he saw the image of Medusa, the only mortal among them, he raised the blade, gifted by the gods and sharper than mortal iron, and with a swift strike, he severed her head from her body. The moment the blade passed through her neck, the earth trembled, and from her open wound sprang two beings, born not in pain, but in strange glory. One was the winged horse Pegasus, who rose into the air with a cry, his hooves striking the sky. The other was Perseus, a giant whose strength would one day be known through his son. Both had been hidden within her, the children of the sea god, who had once lain with her in a field of flowers, long before her monstrous form had been cursed. Perseus wasted no time. He took the head, its eyes still carrying their deadly power, and placed it in the magical bag called the cabesis, closing it tight. But the cry of death had woken the others. Stheno and Euryale, the immortal sisters, sprang into the air, their golden wings slicing the sky as they screamed in rage. They searched the land and the sea, hunting the one who had stolen their sister's life. But Perseus, now wearing the helmet of Hades, was unseen. The helmet did not come from the lord of the underworld himself, as many wrongly believed, but was instead a gift passed down through the gods, made to hide the wearer from all sight. With the sandals bound to his feet, he soared above the earth, light as air and fast as thought, while the sisters searched below. They could not find him, could not catch him, and eventually their cries faded into the distant sky. He flew on, the bag tied securely to his back, the weight of what he had done carried with him through the air. Some said he was given the blade by Hephaestus, forged of adamant, unbreakable and razor-sharp. Others said the blade's origin mattered less than the strike itself, for no one had ever dared to face the Gorgons and lived to tell it. What mattered was that he had done what no one else could. Even the Greyei, the three ancient sisters who watched with one shared eye, had been powerless to stop him. He had taken their eye as they passed it among themselves, blinding them long enough to gain the knowledge he needed, and in some tales he threw it far away into Lake Trindus, so they could never guard again. Though many retold the tale, few agreed on every detail. Some said Athena herself placed the head of Medusa upon her shield, her breastplate shining with a face that turned armies to stone. Others claimed she had slain Medusa herself, while Perseus only carried the tale. But all agreed on one truth, that this act marked him forever. He was not just a hero, not just the son of a woman and a god. He was the one who looked through bronze and struck through reflection, the one who flew with winged shoes and vanished beneath a helmet, the one who held in his hands a death so complete it could silence even the sky. His story filled the stages of lost plays, echoed through the voices of poets and seers, and inspired images carved in red figure on vases, painted on walls, and etched in the memories of those who dared to imagine the edge of the world. In the oldest epics, his name stood beside the names of gods, not just because of his birth, but because of what he did. He went where none would go, and from the place where death slept with wings and snakes. He brought back not just a head, but the proof that even monsters could fall. And still, as he flew on toward whatever came next, the stars above already knew where he would be placed, for some said he would be lifted among them, his form etched in constellations, because no man born of gold and silence could remain on earth alone. Near the bright flowing springs of Oceanus, at the very edge of the known world where day gave way to night and sky met sea, was born the winged horse whose name echoed through legend. And it was from this strange and remote land that the tale of the golden-born sun took flight. Upon the crafted shield of the mighty Heracles, shaped by the hands of the famed fire god, there was an image wrought in shining metal, more lifelike than any painting or statue. In that scene stood the son of Danae, the horseman hero, but he did not touch the ground, nor was he supported by anything visible. He hovered in the air as if frozen in flight, captured mid-motion, his sandals with wings lifting him just above the shining bronze. Upon his shoulders was slung a black-sheathed sword, strapped in place by a crossbelt of hammered bronze, and his whole form stretched forward, his body tense, as if racing away from something terrible. The head of the dreadful Gorgon, recently severed, was pressed against the broad of his back, hidden safely inside a silver bag that glimmered as it swung behind him. From that bag, tassels of gold spilled downward like rays of sunlight catching the edge of horror. His head was covered by the cap of Hades, a helmet so dark it seemed to pull the very light from around it, cloaking him in the invisible shadow of the underworld. He flew in silence, but from behind him came the fury of his pursuers, the other Gorgons, eternal and furious, who rushed after him with wild force. Their feet pounded the adamant beneath them, a pale and unbreakable substance that echoed with each step, like a bell struck in warning. The sound of their pursuit rang across the surface of the shield, loud and terrible. At their waists hung serpents, 2 for each, their scaled bodies coiling and twisting with every movement, their fanged mouths opened with rage, tongues flickering in and out, and their eyes shone with a cruel fire. Their jaws gnashed together with fury, and in their terrible faces the force of fear itself trembled. The very air around them seemed to shake, the edges of their forms blurring with rage. Those who saw the depiction could feel the horror of the chase, the desperate flight of one man carrying death in a bag, while the unspeakable forces of vengeance hurtled after him. And in that moment, the tale found its sound. The goddess of wisdom, she who had guided the hero, and given him the mirrored shield, took the shrieks and wails of the pursuing monsters, the shrill, twisting cries of those who had lost their sister, and wove them into the very heart of music. She shaped those dreadful notes into melodies, binding them into the pipes and flutes that mortals would one day play. The song was called the Lament of Many Heads, a tune that echoed the horror of Euryale's gaping cries and the chaos of that night. It was not just music, but a memory carved into sound. The hero, golden born from the stream that fell from the sky into a bronze chamber, had silenced the third of the monstrous sisters, ending the torment of his mother by bringing the impossible gift. With Medusa's head hidden from view, he returned from the edge of death itself, not to boast or to conquer, but to free his mother from a long chain of fear and unwanted bondage. The ruler of Seriphus had demanded the head as a trick, hoping to rid himself of the hero, and now that very gift would be his undoing. Perseus had brought back not only a head but a reckoning. It was this act, this moment of horror and triumph, that ended the oppression of his mother and brought doom to the isle by the sea. The cries of the Gorgons faded into legend, but their music lived on, reshaped and passed from gods to mortals, no longer to terrify but to remember. And far beyond the cities and seas, at the gatherings of the Hyperboreans, a people who lived in the farthest reaches where the sun was soft and the world was still, Perseus once found rest. There, among their bright homes and sacred rites, he joined their feasts and witnessed their offerings. The Hyperboreans made great sacrifices, not of bulls or sheep, but of humble asses, in honor of their gods, their customs strange but revered. In their celebrations, the golden hero, fresh from the storm of his quest, shared in their peace, his hands for a time free of blades, his heart at ease. It was a moment between trials, a pause in a life shaped by divine birth and deadly tasks, a moment when even one who had flown from monsters could breathe and see the light again. But always behind him trailed the echo of what he had done. The shimmer of the bag with tassels of gold, the weight of the head that could still turn the world to stone. And so, the tale carved on the shield, told in hymns and dirges, painted on walls and shaped into flutes, endured, not because it was beautiful, but because it was true. It spoke of fear, of flight, of things unseen and things endured, and of a hero born from golden rain, who outran horror and gave his mother back her life. In the far reaches of the earth, beyond the grasp of fate's unyielding hand, there existed a land where the people knew no sorrow, where the breath of life was calm and the winds bore no storms, a place untouched by time and death. It was there, among the joyful gatherings of the Hyperboreans, that the son of Danae once arrived, his heart filled with courage and his path guided by Athena. He came not for rest, but in search of what was needed for a task greater than any before him. His feet had travelled long roads, and now they brought him to a place of peace, not for comfort, but for purpose. For here were hidden the three sacred treasures that no mortal might claim without divine aid. The winged sandals that lifted one through the air, the curved blade sharp enough to cut through the immortal, and the cabysis, the magical sack, to contain what could not be touched. These treasures, guarded by the nymphs, waited for the one whom destiny had chosen. And Perseus, shaped by prophecy, born of gold and shadow, stood before them as the one who would bear them into legend. As he made his way from the land of light to the dark edges of the world, tales of his journey echoed in song and on painted vases. On one such vessel, the moment of the deed was captured, when the blade descended and the Gorgon's head fell. Aeschylus told of it in a lost play the second in a great trilogy where the Graii, those ancient and grey sisters who shared one eye and guarded the way, sang their fears and secrets. In the tale, Perseus rushed into the cave of the Gorgons like a wild boar, with force and silence, with sudden movement and deadly aim. Others compared his strike to that of a man reaching back with his hand, not in fury, but in grim precision, grasping what was behind him, as though cutting the Gorgon's head with a motion as sure as a god's command. The poet Lycophron called him the harvester, and Medusa, whose very look turned men to stone, he called a weasel with stony eyes, for from her neck sprang a horse and a man, Pegasus and Chrysol, the children of the sea god, born not from a cradle, but from a severed spine. To reach her, he had first taken the light from the wandering sisters who guided the way. The three, who passed a single eye between them, had watched the path to the Gorgons. With cunning, Perseus snatched the eye mid-passage, and without it, they could not see. Blinded and fearful, they gave him the secret of the nymphs. Some say he cast their eye into the lake of Tritonis, silencing them for good. Then came the treasures, and with them he soared up when he reached the place where the stars bathe in the western sea, where Oceanus flows deep and wide, where night meets sunset and the world bends into the unknown. He found the sisters sleeping. There he hovered, his helmet cloaking him from sight, his blade ready, his shield catching the image of what he could not dare to face. And there he struck. The blow was silent, but the result was not. Blood poured, the head rolled, and the children of the Gorgon leapt into the world. With the head secured in the kibisis, he turned to flee, and the other sisters, Stheno and Euryale, awoke with screams that shook the air. They rose in rage, their wings slicing the wind, their hair hissing with serpents, their eyes wild with fury. But the cap of darkness hid him, and he vanished as they searched. The hero who did this was captured not only in stories, but in sculpture and bronze. At Sparta, on the bronze walls of the great temple, his moment was carved in relief. There he was shown at the beginning of his quest, the nymphs handing him the sandals and cap, while he prepared to meet what no man had ever faced. On the heights of the Athenian Acropolis, a statue stood showing him after the deed, the head held aloft or hidden in his bag, the sword at his side, the face calm but burdened. In another temple, carved in marble, he was shown beside other heroes, standing among the greats, bearing the proof of his courage and the cost of his task. In each image the same truth remained. He who cut the head of Medusa was not only swift and strong, but chosen, shaped by divine will and human endurance. Even the goddess herself who had guided his hand was marked by the act, for the head was given to her and placed upon her breastplate, a shield no longer only of protection, but of warning. Her armor carried the face that turned armies to stone, a reminder of what was done and of what power may rest in silence and shadow. And thus the story spread, shaped by poets, sung in hymns, carved in temples, painted on clay, and whispered in places far from Greece. For this was no simple tale of battle or vengeance. This was a journey to the end of the world, a theft from the realm of death, a flight through darkness, and return with terror in a bag. And as the hero flew back from that place where light ends and shadow begins, the winds that carried him also bore the tale, spreading it across the seas and mountains until the name of the one who slew the Gorgon was fixed among the stars, on the throne of the god at Amyclae. The hero was carved forever in the act that would define him, shown striking down the one whose face could stop the world in silence. The moment captured in stillness was that of Perseus, slaying Medusa, her monstrous form twisted in its final breath, while the curved blade fell with divine precision. On another artifact, the ancient chest at Olympia, there was a scene where the winged sisters of the slain, Gorgon, Stheno, and Euryale, chased the hero through the air, their forms lifted by golden wings, their rage carved into motion. Among all the figures, only the name of the fleeing warrior was marked, as if to emphasize that this story was not theirs, but his, the one who dared to reach into the heart of horror and emerge untouched. In Argos, near the center of the city, not far from where people gathered for daily life, stood a mound of earth that was said to hold the severed head of the monster. There, some spoke of a version of the tale without the divine or the magical. In that telling, Medusa was not a creature of myth, but a queen, a daughter of Perseus, who ruled over the lands near Lake Tritonis. She led armies, hunted with skill, and held her people together with the strength of her will. In this version, she faced the Greeks on a battlefield, and while she slept in her camp at night, the son of Danae came with chosen warriors, slipping through the shadows, and struck her down. He admired her even in death, they said, for her beauty remained despite the violence that ended her life. He cut off her head, not to wield its power, but to carry proof of what he had done, and brought it back to Greece to show the people. Yet another voice, one of a man named Procles, claimed the tale was stranger still. He spoke of wild people from the desert, both men and women, unlike anything known in the cities. He said one such woman wandered far and attacked the people near the lake. The hero killed her, and because the land was sacred to the goddess, the story grew until the act was told not as a battle against a beast, but as a deed aided by divine hands. The myths changed shape, but the core remained. A woman died by the sword of the one chosen by fate, and her story never left the land where it began. Another account, written not in poetry but in history, described a tribe of women warriors who lived in Libya, fierce and unmatched in strength, said to rival any man in battle. These women, called the Gorgons by those who feared them, lived with courage that defied expectation. The tale said that the hero made war against them, not because they were monsters, but because they were unmatched in their might, and their very existence challenged the world's order. It was said that because the son of the sky god himself was needed to defeat them, their power must have been extraordinary. This feat was remembered as the greatest of his deeds, and proof of the force that dwelled in the lands beyond Greece. The story of these women, hardened and brave, was held as an example of a time when strength did not belong to men alone. And from those lands and those labors, from the risks he took and the challenges he overcame, the hero returned not just with a trophy or a tale, but with glory that endured beyond his years. It was not only poets and playwrights who told his story, but also those who carved stone and cast bronze, who placed his likeness among the temples and shrines, who marked his footsteps into marble. His name lived beside other heroes, but the weight of his journey, the strangeness of the path he walked, the mixture of horror and admiration in the head he carried, gave his story a place apart. From the wild lands of Libya, across the sea and sky, to the thrones and markets of Greece, his image remained, sometimes as a slayer of beasts, sometimes as a warrior of the gods, and sometimes as a man who faced the unknown and returned with more than he had left with. The truth, whether told in whispers or carved in bronze, was that he brought an end to something terrible, and in doing so began something lasting. The world remembered him not only for the moment the blade fell, but for all the silence that followed. I, the one who flew through the air on winged feet and dared to rise above the clouds, I who destroyed the one whose hair was a writhing mass of living snakes, the one whose face turned every living thing to stone. I am Perseus, the son of golden descent. And when asked by those gathered at the wedding feast in Ethiopia to speak of how I came to strike down the Gorgon, I told it plainly, without boasting. I told of a place far from cities and far from warmth, beneath the cold and towering range of Atlas, where behind a gate of solid rock, two sisters kept watch. Born of four seas, they shared between them a single eye, passing it from one hand to the other in endless rotation. They stood guard at the entrance of that terrible region, and I, knowing the eye was the key to knowledge, crept close in silence. And just as one sister reached across to hand it to the other, I stretched out my hand and seized it mid-air, robbing them of sight and power. They cried out, blind and afraid, and in their desperation gave me what I sought, the path to the Gorgon. I travelled across wild lands and over jagged ridges, through places where no road ran, across forest-covered hills where light was thin and silence deep. And then I reached the place where she dwelt. I saw before I arrived that I was nearing her lair, for the land was littered with still forms, men who had once lived and breathed, beasts frozen in the middle of their motion, all now statues of stone, locked in fear, their eyes cursed by the one who had seen them before they could look away. I pressed on, cautious, for I knew I could not meet her gaze. Her face was not to be seen by mortal eyes, not directly, but I held a shield polished like a mirror in my left hand and watched her through its reflection. There she lay, deep in sleep, her face still and terrible, and even her snake hair, wild and always in motion, had fallen into slumber. I saw the serpents twitch lightly, as if dreaming their own restless dreams, and in that moment, as her breathing was even and her power was stilled, I struck. I brought the blade down and cleanly separated her head from her neck. Her blood spilled upon the ground, but from that lifeblood, new beings were born. The winged horse Pegasus, brilliant and swift, and his twin, the golden warrior Chrysaor, both bursting from her body at once. The sky seemed to echo with the power of their arrival. I placed the severed head into the kibesis, the sacred bag I had carried for this very task, careful not to let its gaze escape, and turned to leave. But the sound had awakened the others, Stheno and Euryale, and they rose with a roar of grief and fury. Their wings beat the air, their cries pierced the sky, and they flew after me, raging and wild. But the helmet of darkness was upon my head, the helm given by the gods, which cloaked me in invisibility. They chased the wind, not knowing where I had gone. I flew high and far, my feet still lifted by the winged sandals, and I looked down upon seas and mountains as they rolled beneath me. The lands I passed grew smaller as I rose. The stars themselves seemed within reach, and for a moment I moved with them, wing to wing. My journey was long and perilous, filled with shadows and silence, but at every turn the hand of the goddess was near. She who is called Wisdom and War, she who watched over my birth and my steps, she guided me through every danger. It was her help that brought me to the nymphs, her wisdom that taught me to look only through the mirror, her strength that moved my arm in the moment of the strike. All my deeds, all my flights, all the victories were in her name. And now, as I stood among those who feasted at the wedding, those who celebrated love and salvation, I recounted the trials, not with pride, but with the calm of one who had walked through fear and returned. The head, once alive with serpents, now rested in my keeping, still potent, still dangerous. Some later carved the moment into gold, shaping me in mid-flight, holding the Gorgon's head, her eyes heavy and dim, her mouth frozen in its final breath. They said the image almost moved, that the metal seemed to ripple with breath, that the head looked pale even in its golden form. On cups and vases, in marble and on temple walls, the moment lived again, me holding the blade, leaping into the sky, the Gorgon lifeless but still dreadful. The blade they gave me was sharp as adamant, forged by divine hands, and the path I flew was one none could follow. My sandals lifted me above all danger, my helm shielded me from all eyes, and in my hand I carried the death of a legend. Some said I crept silently through the clouds, my knees nimble, my shadow faint. They spoke of how I moved like a thief, silent and swift, and how I caught the Graia's eye as it passed, snatching the future from their grasp. They said the strike came like the end of a storm, sudden and final, and still, even after I had gone, the echoes of that moment lingered in the lands where night met the ocean, where stone men stood by dusty paths, where Pegasus first flew, and where fear was once born with a face. That's what I told them, of monsters and sisters, of a journey across land and sky, of the blood that gave birth to wings, and of the silence that followed a single strike. And so the story, passed from tongue to tongue, remained, not only of what was killed, but of what was carried, of the shield and the flight, of the stars that blinked as I passed, and the ground that turned cold where I walked. That is what I said when they asked me how it was done. While the terrible womb of the monstrous one still swelled with life, still full with the unborn twins of divine conception, the heavy shape of the winged horse had not yet broken through her. And yet, even before the act of birth, even before pain or cry could announce new life, the sharp blade acted like the goddess of childbirth herself, slicing through the thick neck of the pregnant beast, releasing not just blood, but the promise of strange new creatures. No mighty struggle broke the silence as the hero with winged feet crept upon her unseen, for she was motionless, caught in sleep, her head heavy with the curse she bore. There was no fight, no clash of arms or cry of war, only the smooth motion of the curved blade gifted by the goddess, rising and falling, guided by unseen wisdom. The neck split, and out from it came the first harvest, not wheat or grain, but a relic of death, the tangled, writhing cluster of serpent hair that crowned the Gorgon's head, still hissing softly through blood-slicked lips, as if the severed body tried to breathe its last curse into the world. The blood ran down in small, hot streams, and with each drop the earth trembled with the memory of her power. Even the snakes upon her brow whispered and hissed, their movements slowing, their awareness fading, but still alive enough to leave the air thick with dread. And then, as her power died, the earth split in another way, for from that fatal wound burst the children of her secret union, the horse with wings brighter than stormlight, who leapt to the sky as though he had waited all along to be free, and beside him came the boy with the golden blade, shaped like a god though born of blood. But the one who had struck the blow did not linger to see them take form, for even as he closed the bag around her head, the earth shook with fury. Her sisters rose, one screaming, the other howling, both faster than wind and more furious than fire. Though he carried the helmet that hid him from all eyes, though his feet were fast with Hermes' wings, though the blade of Athena still hung at his side, he fled in fear. The sound of the sisters behind him, burning through the air like a horn of war. It was not the sound of a trumpet that chased him, but the deep bellow of the winged horror Euryale, whose voice turned the sky black and split the ground with its fury. Still, he did not stop. The sandals carried him far, over lands scorched by sun and lands washed by sea, away from the cave where he had dared to strike, far from the hole in Libya that had once hidden the terror of the ages. Even before this moment, the path had been paved with danger. He had hunted the single eye of the old watchers, those grey ones who saw all with one orb and shared it among them in a sleep-ridden cycle. Waiting for the moment it passed from hand to hand, he stole it mid-flight, robbing them of sight, forcing them to surrender their secrets. From them he found the way to the cave, the truth of the blade, the bag, the winged shoes, and the helm that would make him vanish. And once he held these, he crossed islands unseen, stepping even upon the secret round place where the Grey Sisters lived, beyond the edge of all maps. And still, the eye of the Gorgon haunted him. The memory of Sthenel's stare, even unseen, was enough to chill his bones. The hiss of her serpents and the scream of her rage followed him as he flew. And still further he flew, over barren Libya, where water was scarce and sun unrelenting, far into the sky, pressing higher until clouds passed beneath his sandals and the wind grew thin. The question rang in the air like a challenge. Had he truly set foot upon that land of horrors, where even the rocks bore the shape of those turned to stone? Had he truly faced the eyes of Sthenel, or the terrible shriek of Euryale? Had he truly stood near enough to feel the heat of Medusa's breath, the hiss of her serpents curling like fire across her brow? The answer, written in the relic he carried, could not be denied. From Danae's womb, he had been born for this, the child of Thunder's king and a locked-away maiden, brought into the world in secret, only to rise and bring silence to what no one else could face. He did not throw away the blade gifted by wisdom, nor did he forget to thank the god of speed who had lent his wings. And even the distant maidens of the golden trees, the singers among the evening stars, raised their voices in honor of the one who had made the sky safer. They sang of the one who had taken the deadly head and placed it where no hand could ever reach, wrapped in the bag that bore the smell of metal and blood and magic. Later, others would carve him in gold, sculpted as a youth in flight, the Gorgon's head gripped in his hand, her eyes still open, her lips still slack. They would say the gold moved, that it shimmered like flesh and seemed to breathe, as if the terror had not quite died. His sandals, the ones that had lifted him, would be copied by poets in verse, described as gifts that made the sky a road and the earth a forgotten blur beneath his feet. They said he crept softly, his steps like a whisper on the clouds, lifting not even the dust as he moved through the cave. And when he struck, the hair came off in curls soaked in red, and each strand writhed as though alive. They said he dipped the head in poison dew, and that even in death its eyes could see. The two born from the wound galloped away, never stopping, never looking back, as though even they feared the still face behind them. And all the while, the one who had struck the blow flew onward, his heart still beating fast, his hands still tight on the bag. The screams behind him faded slowly, the wind carrying them into silence. He had faced what none had faced and lived. He had turned death into flight, horror into victory, and silence into legend. And though he would go on to do more, to meet kings and monsters and stars, this was the moment that echoed most. The blade falling like a star, the hiss caught in her throat, the blood of the unborn gods, and the sound of wings flapping, not from her crown, but from his feet, as he vanished into the sky. Through the great stretches of land and empty sky, while the wind pushed at his shoulders and the earth passed far below him, he saw her, standing alone beneath the wide heaven, a solitary figure, grotesque and still, with eyes that carried a dreadful weight. Her face was unlike anything born of mortal mothers, twisted and ugly, and her gaze seemed heavy with a strange power that throbbed beneath the air. Curious, yet cautious, he turned toward her and asked for her name, and from cracked lips she gave her answer. Medusa. That name, spoken softly into the space between them, awakened the memory of his purpose, and he did as he had been told by those who had given him the tools of the gods. With swift precision and without hesitation, he struck, severing her head as she stood unaware, and when the blow fell, her limbs collapsed like a broken statue, and the silence of that moment was filled only by the strange, dying hiss of the serpents that crowned her brow. He took the head, still dripping, still writhing slightly, as if its curse clung on past death, and raised it aloft as a sign of power. That head, full of such terrible energy, he named Gorgon, not for the woman herself, but for the sheer overwhelming force it carried, and those who looked upon it were overcome, struck by awe or fear, and many were turned to stone as their eyes locked with what had once gazed back with living malice. As he flew from that place with the head hidden in his pouch, his path led him across the great dry land known as Libya. Below him stretched a desert scorched by sun and wind, where every hill of sand shimmered with heat and the silence pressed down like a weight. But even here, where no life dared linger long, something stirred from the dark blood of Medusa, thick and black as it fell. New life sprang forth, but not the kind that sang or grew green. No, this life was venomous. Each drop of her blood that touched the desert sands gave birth to a serpent, long and deadly, crawling with silent menace across the earth. In the warmth of the midday heat, one such serpent lay coiled in the sand, its body thick and unmoving, not striking, not slithering, simply waiting. Though it did not attack any traveler, its venom was so potent that a single drop could bring death faster than a falling blade. It was said that no living creature on the face of the earth could survive its bite. Thus the land of Libya, once dry but plain, was now cursed with the coils of these creeping horrors, born not of natural wombs, but from the very blood of the Gorgon herself. Still, the hero did not slow. His wings carried him across vast distances, blown this way and that by winds that knew no master. He drifted above cities, forests, mountains, and more sands, his direction changing with every gust of air, like a smoke cloud tossed across the sky. From that great height, he saw all the lands of men, all the shapes of their dwellings and fields, but none of it slowed his pace. He passed over the lands of the north, where the bears turned forever in the night sky, and 3 times he watched them spin as he crossed over that cold and distant place. 3 times too, he saw the crab's arms stretched in the stars, a sign of how long he wandered. His course never stayed steady, sometimes west, sometimes east, and no land seemed fixed beneath his feet. He crossed the wide turning of the world until the light of the sun began to fall low on the horizon, and darkness crept up the sky. Night came fast in those high airs, and with it came the quiet hush of fear. For even one who bore the tools of gods did not welcome the dark after such a journey. In the farthest west, where the stars first began to appear, he came to a place that seemed to lie at the very edge of the world. There he sought rest, and the sky above him slowly turned from gold to purple to black. It was here, in the realm of the Ancient One who held up the heavens themselves, that he thought to wait until morning. The one who ruled this far place was vast and heavy, a figure not of ordinary men, but of the old race, the Titans who came before, and his name was known across the world as Atlas. Born of those first beings, he was mightier than mountains, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the heavens. His gaze swept across all that lay below, and his power stretched from the western oceans to the edge of the earth. He ruled these distant lands where no road led and no city stood. It was in this place, beneath the sky darkened by dusk and lit only by the distant stars, that the hero came with the severed head still tucked within his pouch. From that pouch, the blood of the Gorgon had already poisoned the land below. But now, something else was about to happen. For when he revealed the face of the head to the one who stood tall and proud, the result was instant. That gaze, though lifeless, still held its curse. The great Titan who bore the weight of the cosmos looked upon it and began to change. His limbs stiffened, his skin turned grey, and the veins that once pulsed with power now froze in place. His body became stone, solid, unyielding, a new mountain in a land already shaped by time and godly wrath. Thus was Atlas turned to stone, not through battle or war, but through the quiet reveal of a face once feared by gods. His form remained there, rooted to the earth, forever gazing toward the heavens he had once upheld, his body now part of the very mountain range that bore his name. From that point, the journey continued, but the land was no longer the same. Libya, now infested with vipers, held the memory of the slain Gorgon in every step. The winds that carried him had seen the changing of titans into stone, and the skies above him now bore witness to the power he carried. The blood, the hiss, the cry, the silence. Each part of the tale unfolded not with fanfare, but with quiet certainty, as the world itself bent beneath the weight of what had happened. The name of Medusa, once whispered in fear, now echoed as the symbol of something even more terrifying. Destruction by mere sight. And the hero, though he still bore her face, now knew its burden. What he had done shaped lands, twisted the future, and turned even skybearers into statues. His wings carried not just his body, but the silent wrath of the head within the bag, hidden, sleeping, yet never truly still. The sun was slowly descending from the sky, and the chariot of daylight grew weary, as if longing for rest beneath the horizon. In the westernmost reaches of the world, beyond the bounds of familiar lands, stood a realm untouched by ordinary men. Here, the land was guarded not by walls of stone alone, but by secrets older than memory, by creatures that watched without sleeping, and by the one who bore the weight of the sky itself. In this distant place, 1,000 herds wandered freely across endless fields, and countless flocks grazed in peace, undisturbed by war, untouched by time. No neighboring tribes dared to encroach upon this blessed ground. The trees in that golden orchard did not bear ordinary fruit. Instead, their leaves shimmered like polished gold, their boughs gleamed in the waning light, and from their limbs hung perfect apples formed of solid gold, dazzling in the sun's last rays. This was the sacred grove, guarded fiercely, treasured deeply, where the gifts of the gods themselves hung in silence, waiting. Into this radiant and guarded land came the winged traveler, his feet still dusted with the blood of the monster he had slain. He carried a power not seen in mortal realms, but he came not as a conqueror, not yet. Tired from the journey, the wanderer approached the Ancient One who ruled this place, the mighty bearer of the sky, one whose body had known the weight of the cosmos upon his shoulders. And in the fading light, the traveler spoke, his voice filled with both strength and plea, declaring that he was born of a noble line, that his father was the king of gods, and that he himself had completed mighty deeds worthy of renown. He asked not for treasure or praise, but for rest, for shelter, for a brief place to breathe before continuing his path. But the one who stood over that land was not moved by kind words or noble claims. he remembered the words that had once been spoken by the goddess of divine law, the one who sees the threads of fate long before they unfold. She had once said to him, "Mark the day, Atlas, for a son of the King of Heaven will come to your land, and he will steal the golden fruits of your trees, and the glory you cherish shall pass from your hands to his." Those words had burrowed deep into his mind and twisted his heart with fear. And so, to guard what was his, he had raised strong walls around the orchard and placed within them a serpent of monstrous size and unceasing watchfulness. A guardian that needed no rest. No guest, no traveller, no stranger was allowed past the gates, for the memory of prophecy was too sharp and the dread of loss too great. So when the winged stranger arrived, Atlas did not greet him as kin or honour him as a hero. Instead, he saw only danger in the boy's eyes and deception in his noble words. He told the traveller to leave, to abandon all hope of shelter, and to take his boasts elsewhere. He declared that not even the King of Heaven could help him, and then, with force, he sought to drive the weary figure away from his borders, treating him as an intruder rather than a guest. Though the younger man was strong, he knew he could not match the physical might of the one who held up the sky. Yet strength of arm was not the only strength he carried. With calm but firm resolve, he offered no more words. He simply reached to his side and lifted the object he had kept hidden from sight, the dreadful trophy of his earlier battle, the severed head of the one whose gaze turned all to stone. He did not strike. He did not lift a weapon. He merely turned his face, and the head upon his left was revealed. The features were twisted, lifeless, yet somehow still awake with power. The snakes that once hissed and writhed atop her scalp now lay still, but even in death the curse of that face remained. And the moment that Atlas beheld it, the moment his eyes met hers, everything changed. His breath caught in his chest, his limbs froze, and his skin began to harden. The transformation was swift but not without wonder. His feet, once firm on the earth, sank into it and became one with it. His legs thickened, his arms stretched outward and upward, and his back bent and widened until it bore the shape of hills. His beard flowed like a forest down a steep slope, and his hair spread wide like thick woods across a ridge. His shoulders rose into high ridges, and his hands, once open with power, became the jagged peaks of crags. His head, the highest part of him, lifted to become a peak that pierced the very sky. His bones became stone, and his breath became wind, and he grew and grew until he was no longer a man but a mountain, towering above the land, watching the heavens as he had done for ages, but now unable to speak or move. He had become what the gods had destined. No longer could he drive away the son of the King of Heaven. No longer could he guard his orchard or protect the golden fruit. The words of the goddess had come true, not by force of war or clash of weapons, but by the silent power of a severed face held in a sack. And the stars, once resting on his shoulders by will, now rested there by the command of the gods, for they found no better place to stand than on the towering spine of the one who once bore them freely. The world shifted around him, the sky spun above him, and time moved on, but he remained, silent, vast, immovable. The mountain that was once Atlas still rose toward the stars, and every star above knew what had passed below. The golden apples still hung in their grove, but the guardian was no longer a man. The prophecy had spoken, the traveller had come, and the heavens themselves bore witness to the day the sky-bearer became stone.